continue.
Some housekeeping items as people continue to log in. This is being recorded, so if you're not able to watch it live, you can watch it later. And there are opportunities for Q&A on the chat function and questions function. And you are, as a viewer, muted both visually and by audio, so no sweat there. Taryn is our technical producer, and she's gonna get the show kicked off here.
Since 1992, Carolina International Trucks and Idea Lease has supported commercial trucking with our 6 South Carolina locations, serving all makes and models of commercial trucks. We want to thank the hard-working heroes of the trucking industry. From drivers to technicians, these dedicated workers are the backbone of our communities, transporting and distributing supplies and food that otherwise would not be delivered. At Carolina International Trucks and Idea Lease, we encourage you to thank a trucker and show them your support today. Trucking moves America forward.
Okay, welcome again, everybody. My name's Rick Todd. I'm President and CEO of the South Carolina Trucking Association, and we're here live in our makeshift studios in the W.T. Castles Junior Conference Room in SCTA's headquarters in downtown Columbia, right up from 5 Points on Divine Street, conveniently located about a mile from our state capitol. Once again, I want to thank the sponsors of this extraordinary truck fund that's been created to support SCTA during these extraordinary times. They are McGriff Insurance Services, Carolina International Trucks, the Bunch Truck Group, Christopher Trucks, Excel Truck Group, the Pete Store, and Worldwide Equipment, the truck people. You know, here in our building, this is our members' asset, but whether you're a member or a non-member, we encourage you to come by, stop, and meet us, visit our staff, and just talk about whatever you need to talk about. I think you'll be impressed. If you're not a member, I think we can get you to join before you leave. This is our final session in a series we called Essential Association. And it features today one of our state's greatest assets, and that is our state ports authority, the port system we have. You know, facilitating international trade, despite all the present rhetoric, is inarguably essential for our nation's economy, for our region's economy, but particularly for South Carolina's economy, and leading and conducting the complex, diverse, and multimodal maritime transportation industry is the job of the State Ports Authority. And the guy who's running it is the president and CEO, Jim Newsome. Jim has to manage, and I would probably think cajole, a dizzying diversity of interests while keeping the ports on a growth and efficiency track in what is a highly capital intensive, hyper competitive sector. Each player struggles to make a buck, and Jim wants to keep the supply chain at max velocity. It takes a strong leader and a great team. Jim is one of our industry, intermodal trucking industry particular, greatest advocates, and he'll talk about that in a few minutes. Jim joined the Ports Authority in 2009 and is just the 5th leader in the history of the authority. And he's currently the longest serving major container port leader in the United States. Having an extensive career in the ocean container shipping industry, he was the first American to assume top roles with in the United States with Hapag-Lloyd and Ned Lloyd Lines. And I think you can attribute that to his BS and MBA in transportation and logistics from UT. Notice his lapel pin, and his top of class rankings at the end of his formal education. He's recognized through shiploads of honors, volunteering, and organizational leadership activity. So Jim, we welcome you to our screens for this conversation about how South Carolina ports keep freight moving.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thanks to all the participants in the call. Today, you get a glimpse behind me of our new headquarters. You see our logo. We're actually in a live production studio that we have here. So it's a great privilege always to speak to the truckers. When deciding how to approach this meeting, I decided not to use a presentation. We've got a glamorous new corporate presentation that we've just done that we can share with Rick, and Rick can certainly share it with the members. But I'd like to do it a little more lively, a little more extemporaneously, and cover really a wide range of topics, which I hope will be of interest to you. But right off the start, I need to thank each and every one of you. I think that this port doesn't open on any day without the great commitment of the truckers that serve this port and that serve the state of South Carolina. And certainly we've had no better supporter than the South Carolina Trucking Association. And I mean it sincerely. I mean, we handle 700 truck transactions in a busy hour at the Wando terminal. We know it's a hard way to make a living. We're just always amazed by the dedication of the individual truckers. And we really make it our mission in life to make sure that the truckers can make a good living, that they get in and out of here fast, that we listen to your concerns. So, you know, improvement's always a moving target. It's a journey, not a destination. So we're always open to ideas, but I really want to just start by thanking you for the commitment that you make to be in this industry. And equally, I'll tell you, and I think you'll see that as far as the port is concerned, I think our best times are really ahead of us here, and I hope to cover a bit of that with you today. So just to tell you a bit about the impact of the pandemic on the port and on our industry here, I think the good news is that the port and the supply chain is an essential industry, so we really have not missed a beat in terms of working and operating hours, and I think that's a tribute to Our industry is a tribute to the commitment of the people. If you think about how many family lives have been upended, with kids being at home and not at school and things of that nature. I had a friend of mine tell me that people have finally figured out that it's not the teacher, it actually may be their kids now. So I don't know if that's true or not. But so we really haven't missed a beat in terms of work here. We were sailing along, we have a July through June fiscal year, and we were at a record pace. We were on, 25,000 containers ahead of we measure by pier containers on and off ships. And we were 25,000 containers ahead of plan through February, through 8 months of our fiscal year. And we, through March, we'd made about 75 million in operating cash flow. So our target is really, we wanted to get to 1.4 million containers and 100 million in operating cash flow. So we were sailing along, and then China didn't come back from Chinese New Year due to the pandemic, and then the Western world shut down pretty much, including our very important automotive industry here in South Carolina. So the impact of that is that we've endured about 60 what we call blanked or canceled sailings, which is, if you put that in context, that's about 10% of the sailings that we would have expected in the February through June timeframe didn't materialize. And then the sailings that did materialize, the average lift count was down 5 to 10%. So really in April, May, and June, we're going to be down about 15%. So having been 25,000 containers ahead of plan, we'll end the fiscal year 50,000 containers behind plan. It's just a fact of life. It's not anything to overly mope or cry on our beer about. It's just something we have to deal with. We're making our budget for next year. And I'll present that to our board next week. We've already discussed it with our board, so I can tell you a bit about it. I think our volumes will do about 1.33 million pier containers this year. We had hoped to do 1.38. And next year, we think that number will be about 1.235. So we're down about 8%. And we see that really the first fiscal quarter, July through September, being the weakest, and every quarter after that really improving. So, and then by fiscal 2022, the next year, I think we'll be back to where we should have been in fiscal 2020. So if you look back at the recession of 2008 in the Southeast port business, we got back to in 2010 to where we were in 2008. And I think that will be roughly the same here in fiscal 2022 relative to fiscal 20. I'm counting on the fact that we're going to have a vaccine in this country, that we're going to, sooner rather than later, maybe the beginning of next year. I'm counting on the fact that we're going to play college football, by the way. I hope so, although there may not be anybody in the stands, but let's hope that happens. And I think we're really just down to the fact that, people have to individually be intelligent about how they go about their business. And as I have observed our industry has been exemplary in that. We've gone through it. We had a pandemic plan together. As you probably know, a port is in a way a socially distanced business because most of our people are in lift machines. They don't see people face to face. We fortunately decided to handle trucks remotely several years back, so there's no face-to-face interaction there. We even processed TWIC cards sort of with an extended polls type concept today. So we were in good shape fundamentally to begin with. So we'll get through the pandemic. It's a pothole, not to use a pun, but I mean, it's something that we just have to deal with. But the point that I really want to leave you with is the pandemic has not at all influenced or detracted from our bullish outlook on the port going forward, for our investment planning, and for the many exciting projects that we're working on here. So I want to really transition from sort of what we're dealing with short term to the exciting things that we're working on today here in the port, if I can. As you probably know, and I don't go too much into history, but in 2009, we handled less than 700,000 containers in the port here. We were on track to handle about 1.4 million this year. So we really have doubled our volume in 10 years' time. That's been very much on the back of the advanced manufacturing industry in South Carolina. In fact, there's a one-for-one relationship between the growth of jobs in advanced manufacturing and the growth of volume in the port. It's quite interesting. Dr. Von Nessen of the University of South Carolina really called our attention to that. It's an interesting fact. So we've grown because South Carolina has really been a juggernaut in attracting manufacturing. Again, that has a large measure to do with the capability of our trucking community. We don't, however, think that advanced manufacturing is going to double in the next 10 years. I mean, I would love to tell you that I think BMW is going to double the footprint in their plant in Greer, but we know that's not the case. In fact, that plant is probably as big as it's ever going to be. So a few years back, we really decided that we needed to diversify our cargo base to really tack into some different areas. And one of those areas is retail distribution. So we've never been historically strong in retail distribution. And we are now embarking on several projects, which I'll talk about in a bit, which I think really will lead us both to a bright future together. Because as you know, that 70% of the U.S. economy is consumption. It's about retail distribution. You know, distribution is changing today, certainly. You see that in the e-commerce numbers of all the omni-channel retailers. They're growing dramatically. I also think that's good for our business as well. Talk a bit about that. If anything, if there's any silver lining in the pandemic, that's hard to find, but if there is one, I think people have got a newfound appreciation for the supply chain and for trucking. People have finally connected the dots and realized that toilet paper only gets to Harris Teeter or Publix by a truck. So I think that's good news. I think we have to work together to make sure that we cultivate a positive image for the trucking industry, going forward. So as we grow, as we aspire to grow in import distribution, we also realize that we have to foster export cargo as well, because people want to balance, shipping lines want to balance their containers. So we've worked equally hard on cultivating transloading operations, the most prominent of which is plastics transloading. We will have 2 major projects coming online here in the Charleston area by October. It'll be a total of 4 such facilities that essentially repackage bulk resin from the U.S. Gulf, put it into containers for export. And those 4 facilities, probably after a year ramp up, have about 70,000 container capacity. So that will be an additional part of our growth. So we are working on a lot of exciting projects, as you know, from following the industry and what you see in your own companies. Retail is a diverging industry today. The large omni-channel capable retailers, I don't have to name them. I mean, you know them: Amazon, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Lowe's. The ones that could deliver both in bricks and mortar and through e-commerce, they're thriving today. The more specialized retailers, not so much. So this is really becoming a 2-tier retail economy. And fortunately, where we have been devoting our time is really on the large retailers. So I'll talk a bit about that going forward. So if you look at the port, and if and Rick said it's a very complex world here. It's really, I don't see it as a very complex world. I mean, if you think about what we do every day, we load ships and we load trucks, and we have to organize ourselves to do that in the most efficient way that we can. And we really focus on 4 major things. One, and sort of the precursor to anything else that we do, is to make sure that the port works well. And there obviously are objective standards in our industry about what that looks like. I mean, obviously getting a truck in and out, including queue time, within an hour for a dual mission is critical. That's the standard, that's the expectation. And not just focusing on average turn times, but also focusing on the ones that are outliers, the ones that are problems, and finding ways that we can do better on those. So we are fortunate with a great maritime community, a very knowledgeable trucking community that knows how to get around our terminals, and a very committed group of people, in the port to perform very well on U.S. type standards. The second thing that we focus on is building infrastructure. It's a big ticket infrastructure business. Infrastructure in our business both takes a long time and it's very expensive. So we have done a really good job of that in the last 6 years. As you likely know, we're on the tail end of a 6-year capital push here to deliver a number of major projects. We started really working on that when our Chief Operating Officer, Barbara Melvin, came over here to run operations, and we'll finalize that next year. So what does that look like? One, we were always working on a new container terminal in North Charleston, the Leatherman Terminal, as it's come to be known. We'll deliver phase 1 of that terminal next year in March. There's a port access road that comes to that terminal that we can talk about a bit. So that's exciting because the last new container terminal that was built in the United States was opened in 2009. So it's been 12 years since we've had a new terminal. We'll add 2.4 million TEUs to our capacity. So we'll be about the same capacity as Wando Terminal when it's built out in 3 phases. And the phase 1 will open in 2021. Phase 3 will open in the early 2030s. So that's when it will be fully operational. So we've been working on that for a long time, since 2003 actually. So it takes a long time to do these things. It's a $1.8 billion investment, so it's a very expensive terminal for 300 acres, but it's an important part of our future. What we had not really planned well for was that we had to do a lot of work on the Wando terminal to make it capable for big ships. So as you know, any one of your drivers that comes out here will tell you that in 10 years' time, they've seen a lot bigger ships. And certainly we had to be ready to handle those with bigger cranes, with more lift machines, with denser stacks, things of that nature. So we have invested almost $500 million in the Wando terminal. We've added about 700,000 TEUs of capacity to that terminal in doing so. We'll have a total of 15 cranes with 155 feet of lift height here. Previous cranes were 115 feet of lift height. You say, why is that important? Because they have to be able to work over 9 or 10 high stacks on the ship. So that project will be finalized mid next year. We'll take the terminal again to 2.4 million TEUs of capacity. So we really have planned our capacity for the next 20 years in a very good way. And we were very fortunate to be able to borrow money last October to finalize our capital projects. We borrowed $550 million in the face of a trade war when everybody, fortunately, no one knew about the pandemic, or I'm not sure that we would be able to borrow the money today because the rating agencies have downgraded the port industry. But we did that in good time. So we're in good shape there. You all know that we're deepening our harbor. Again, a very important project to handle big ships. And the good news of that project is that it will be the deepest harbor on the East Coast. It's fully funded by the federal government. A lot of advocacy work by organizations such as yours, our congressional delegation, certainly the state legislature in terms of putting the money, $300 million aside in 2012 is a tangible sign that we were going to finalize that project to the Army Corps. So that project will be finished end of next year. And so the sum total of all these projects really is to create more capacity to facilitate growth in the future and remove all the restrictions that ship lines might face to get ships in and out fast. Like a truck wants to get in and out of our terminal fast, a ship wants to get in and out fast and without restriction. And all what we've done will enable them to do that, and that makes them more willing to call a port like ours. So in 2010, when I started here, shortly after I started here, we had our first 8,000 TEU container ship. And that was a really big deal that day. And it was a lot of wind in our sails when we did that. Fast forward to today, the 8,000 TEU ship is kind of the average size of ship that we have today. And we're handling 4 13,000 TEU ships or bigger. We're going to have 6 next year. And we think we'll have an 18,000 TEU ship here shortly after the Leatherman terminal is open. So that's exciting for us. We're ready to handle them. If we're not ready to handle them, they simply would go elsewhere. As Rick said, it's a very competitive business. There's no lack of people that want to handle these ships. So I think as a strategic asset for the state, we're certainly well prepared to assimilate the growth that we see going forward. The third thing that we do is, again, diversify our cargo base, make sure we're not dependent on one segment. We had to move, as I said, into a different direction retail-wise. If you remember, shortly after I came here in 2009, we attracted a big distribution center to Summerville. It was the TBC Corporation or Tire Kingdom. And at that time, Summerville was really going to be our distribution hub. And I think it's fair to say that the port probably wasn't ready for that at the time. I mean, we had lost a lot of volume, so that really never materialized. So as we were in early 2018, we saw 1,000 acres of land come for sale in Ridgeville, which is exit 187 on I-26. Most of you will know that. We had about 16 days to buy it, and we did so with the support of our board. Westrock sold it to us at a very good price. And that really has become our beachhead for the future of retail distribution here. So we think that the Ridgeville area will be a catalyst for big box distribution. We're working on some projects there. I can't tell you more than that today, but I think that by the end of the year, you'll see the full context of what I'm talking about. We also have worked to activate the Wando transload facility. On the Wando terminal, as you probably know, we've got a 200,000 TEU clear span transload building on the Wando terminal. That is handling the e-commerce traffic for a major omni-channel retailer today based in Northwest Arkansas, not otherwise indexed by name. But they are using that building today, and they'll handle about 20,000 containers through the Wando transload. There's a company, Tradeport, that's handling that for them. And that building has more capacity as well. So I think we're making a good start into the retail distribution arena. I think it's timely in the sense that why were we not in it before? We chose not to focus on it because we were focusing on manufacturing. Number one, South Carolina is a relatively small state to begin with, so retail typically follows population. But I think in the future now that e-commerce distribution needs a lot more distribution capacity. All the studies done by the experts on this topic say that e-commerce drives the need for way more square footage and way more distribution centers, because you and I want packages in a day. We don't want them in a week. And I'm sure in your e-commerce experience and in my e-commerce experience, you really see the difference between the firms that are really geared to handle e-commerce and the ones that are struggling to get up on the curve to do it in a timely fashion. So there's a lot of opportunity out there distribution-wise, I think, for private sector partners. We need good private sector partners to do that. But that's an exciting part of our cargo diversification. And as I said, we would pair that with exporting of basic commodities. I mean, as a country, we either export high-end things like BMW X5s or Boeing planes, or we export basic commodities. So we're really focused on refilling those containers, hopefully having export transloading out in Ridgeville, where we can keep the containers out there basically to reload them and bring them back to the port and try to minimize empty miles on the highway. So diversifying our cargo base, I think we're well on track to do that. And then the last area of focus is rail. We have got to continue to grow the ability to move containers by short haul rail here. I don't think that's an enemy of the trucking industry. I think the trucking industry can fold nicely into that. I think it actually creates opportunities more than limits opportunities. As you know, we built a world-class inland port in Greer. That does about 150,000 rail lifts a year. It's way more than I thought it would do when we opened it in November of 2013. Clifton Parker and I have a lot of stories about me telling him about that, when it was happening. But I think fast forward, it's been a good thing for the state. And I think it will continue to be, because we think there's another wave of distribution center development up there to support the use of that facility. You've seen First Solar is doing solar panel distribution in that location. Stanley Black & Decker is growing their volume there. So we think that facility can handle over 200,000 lifts. We opened a second inland port in Dillon. That was an anchor tenant for that, Harbor Freight Tools, which has 3 million square feet there. And so that facility's done about 30,000 containers. this year. Last year, we had our best month ever in May, and we think it will continue to grow. So we are very much focused on growing out, on perfecting the reliability of the supply chain network in South Carolina and the region. Another advantage of Dillon, it's right on the North Carolina border. If you look at North Carolina and South Carolina together, they're about 17 million in population, and they're the 6th largest GDP in the country. So there's a lot of emphasis on growing this economy here, and we think the port and the trucking community can be a part of that. We do about 25% of our containers by rail by what I call an imperfect system. Again, thanks to the trucking community. Here, we've been able to mount a rail drayage program whereby we literally contract about 350,000 truck moves a year. And that's been important to give us a rail presence, but we need a new intermodal container transfer facility. And we hope to build one in partnership with the Palmetto Railways near the Leatherman Terminal. And obviously we need some funding for that. It's not in our capital plan right now. So we're going to need some assistance on that to make that reality. But that could be in operation 2 or 3 years from now. As I said on an interview yesterday, we've been talking about that way too long. I mean, that was an idea well before my time here. And we certainly need to realize that. So rail is an important part of expanding the footprint of a port. And we certainly are working very hard with the Class 1 railroads. They support the use of this new intermodal container transfer facility. As I said, Palmetto Railways has been a good partner in that, and we hope to realize that together. So, I mean, those are the major things that we focus on strategically here. What I also like to emphasize to people, although I've talked only about hard assets and things of that nature, the most important asset of the port are the people. And the people, not just the 730 people that work for the port, but really the longshore unions, the trucking community, the tugs, the pilots, the quality of the workforce that is really committed every day to provide a great product to our customers. We've worked really hard in the port to adopt a new culture, a modern management culture. I often say that's a culture that was focused on saying yes and not saying no. You know, one of my favorite management sayings in life is that the easiest answer to give in the world is no, because you don't have to think about it. It doesn't take you very long to give that answer. But if you're going to get the yes, there's a lot of thought that goes into it, because your reputation depends on fulfilling the commitment that you make. So we've really worked hard with our management team on solving problems, on trying to listen. I would say we were not always maybe good listeners. I think we've changed that. We're changing that, and really getting our folks focused on driving continuous improvement. My goal for this organization is really that every day our people wake up with the idea of doing something better every day that they come to work, and that when they leave work at the end of the day, they can identify what that is and say, we've done a good job today, let's do something different and better tomorrow. So I think if we together have that type of mentality, I think we're going to prosper, you know, again. I think we also have to be very conscious of the fact that we can't just optimize our own individual operations. I mean, it would have been very easy for the port to say, we're not going to do Saturday gates, or we're not going to operate extended hours, we're going to curtail our truck hours and things of that nature. But I think that would have sent absolutely the wrong message to our customers who rely on us to be consistent. And I think that would have curtailed opportunities for truckers to make a good living. You know, one of the big fears of this pandemic was all the cargo would back up on our wharf and we would not be able to handle all the cargo, and that really hasn't materialized. So again, it's a work in progress here to change our culture, to make sure we have the right human capital, the right successors to me one day. You probably figured out by looking at me, I'm not 29. I'm not going to be here forever. So we're grooming a leadership team that certainly, in my vision, will be better than we are today. So that's exciting. some things just closer to home of more interest, I hope, to you as truckers that certainly serve the port and serve the greater supply chain here. We've been really focused on chassis. I know that's one of the topics that I hate to talk about. I said to someone facetiously, I said, I've been 43 years in the industry. I've been talking about chassis problems for every day of those 43 years, and I don't really want to do it anymore. In fact, I'm not having any more panels at trade conferences to talk about chassis. I even joke with my wife. I said, the next chassis panel you can have is at my funeral, when I don't have to listen to it one day, you know, because they can talk. But no, we are working hard to optimize the chassis fleet. We made a purpose-built chassis yard here at the Wando terminal with something called a ready row. A ready row is a novel concept because if I use a rental car analogy, it's trying to overcome the fact that sometimes the chassis people wanted a trucker to stand in line and have the transmission changed while they waited, right? I mean, it's not a fair concept. So we really have worked hard on having a ready chassis available. But the reality of life is that this chassis pool is a lot of old chassis. They're 20 years old and older. Some 20% of them don't even have anti-lock brakes. They're all owned by private equity. So we think there's a better model in the future. And what I would say is that we will not rest as a port until we secure that better model. We've got some ideas of what that looks like. It's absolutely irresponsible that we haven't fixed it as an industry, and I really have made it sort of a cause célèbre in my remaining time working in this port to fix that issue, basically. So there are good solutions out there. There are plenty of people that want to provide new chassis, and my goal, I mean, the 40% of the chassis are sort of owned individually today, not part of the pool, but I would love us to one day have one great pool here that all people can rely on, that's well maintained, that is sold at a fair price, you know, not a price where the carriers pay X and the truckers pay 6 times X. That's unfair, obviously. So what we've realized is that a container doesn't move without a chassis. So we got to find the best way to provide a good quality asset at a reasonable price. We're going to work on that. I'm very grateful to the Charleston motor carriers and the local truckers here that serve our terminal. We, as you know, we opened the Wando terminal in 1981. So it's been here almost 40 years. I mean, next year's its 40-year anniversary. And in the ensuing time, a lot of neighborhoods grew up around this terminal. I mean, the terminal was clearly here first, but that doesn't matter. That's not a point I'm trying to make. But we coexist on Long Point Road with a really nice neighborhood community, and we have to do our part to make sure that we provide a safe environment. So with the cooperation of the truckers with whom we meet quarterly here, I think that's been a good initiative, a lot of good contributions. We started the Long Point Road Good Neighbors program. And what essentially was this: we asked the truckers to slow down to 35 miles an hour and to respect the fact that there were people coming in and out of the neighborhoods. There's no accusation against the truckers, for gosh sakes, no. We know from the Mount Pleasant Police that 98% of the citations given on Long Point Road are to private vehicles, they're not to trucks. The truck drivers are the safest people on the road. And as I explained to the neighbors when they come here, I said, look, those people have a lot of skin in the game. You know, in the bacon and egg breakfast, the chicken's involved, the pig's committed. They have skin in the game. They lose their job if they don't drive safely. So they're very serious about being safe. But we have to continue to coexist on that road, and I'm very grateful to the truckers for doing that and for participating in a very responsive way to the community. Because I think, as I said earlier, and one thing I've talked to Rick about, I think we need as an industry, and certainly as a supply chain industry and the trucking industry, and maybe the pandemic is a catalyst for that, we need to continue to talk about the positive benefits of trucking and the really great people that work in the industry, and also to make it an industry where we attract new people. We are working, we've talked to Rick, and I think you'll see in some of the developments that we'll announce in the future in the retail arena, that a lot of that's going to be based on trucking fleets. There's going to be a lot of need for truck capacity to serve these facilities on a reliable basis, both in terms of import containers coming to the facility, but even as much more importantly, 53-foot containers going out of the facility to onward distribution centers. So that we're going to have to find a way together to attract people to this industry and make it a very good profession. I'm about 5 minutes away from question and answer. I did also want to cover the Leatherman terminal again real quickly. There is a dedicated port access road off of 26. You see that if you come in and out of Charleston. That's going to be completed well in time. I think it's going to be completed by December of this year. We'll have plenty of capacity. It's a dedicated road for trucks. As you know, as I said to you, we're opening the terminal in 3 phases. So really what we'll do, we'll move about, this terminal at Wando handles about 1.1 million containers a year. We'll move 350 or 400,000 containers over there as part of phase 1. And that will be the initial start of the terminal. So we'll be moving some quantity of business from Wando over there, you know, in March of next year. So the port access road has got plenty of capacity, you know, for trucks. I think it will be an asset to the trucking community in terms of getting in and out. So that is pretty much the extent of what I wanted to cover with you today in terms of formal remarks. As I said, I would gladly we'll gladly send along our brand new presentation, which Rick can share. I didn't want to go through a point-by-point presentation today. I wanted to try to keep it a little more interesting. But I again can only thank you, tell you that we are truckers at heart here. I mean, we understand the difficulty of your business, that we are a big part of you making a successful livelihood, and we're committed to do better. And what I would say to you, if you're having problems, I say we have average turn times, but if you have an average turn time of 45 minutes, you know, there's a non-average turn time of an hour and a half out there. So how do we address those contemporaneously? How we can't address those is waiting to after the fact and talking to a week later about it. So everybody's got a cell phone today. If you got problems, let's deal with them contemporaneously. Let's try to get your folks in and out of here in a timely basis. We will, last thing, Rick, we will, as we grow in distribution, we're gonna have to expand gate hours here. It's inevitable. We've had some talks locally about it. We're grateful for input on that. Our thinking is that when we do it, that people certainly don't want to work between 5 p.m. and midnight. That seems to be kind of the time when people want to go to their kids' games and have dinner with their families, and we respect that. And we also know that Sundays are different because you have a 34-hour, you have a 34-hour reset, and you need that time, and it's also, you need some time with family as well. So we are thinking when we come to that day, we'll have to go to earlier hours, maybe midnight, 1 a.m., something like that. Those are costly hours for us in the port, but we would be grateful for input over time, and we'll obviously seek input when we get closer to that. So, Rick, that's about it.
Well, that was a lot. You covered a lot, and I think you probably answered most of the questions before they had a chance to pose. We've got a couple of chat ones. One we got, and I don't know exactly how you're going to be able to answer this, other than I'm sure you talk about this kind of thing in your visioning and long-term meetings, maybe as a board or operationally. But the question we got, one of them was, as electrification and autonomy move into the trucking industry, and this question is about trucking, probably not from your side, but how will this impact costs to move freight, and would that, or does that impact the Port Authority itself or your operations, and does it impact your decisions with respect to rail?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't, it's one of the things I'm very interested in learning more about. I mean, I hear about autonomous trucks and electrification. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that. You know, frankly, the timeliness of it and the infrastructure that it takes to serve that. So I'm curious about it. Certainly, we have looked for solutions in terms of terminal tractors and stuff like that on our terminal with electrification. And up to now, they just don't seem to have the capacity that we need to. They need to be charged too much. So it's something we're going to have to pay attention to. It's hard for me to imagine an autonomous vehicle. Maybe I'm just too old. I don't know what it is.
I agree with you.
I hope I'm not driving when all that happens, because this could probably freak me out maybe. But certainly we're going to have to spend some time understanding that. We've dealt with electrification in most of our yard equipment, but certainly where do those things, how does that, what's the length of haul? Can we use that in short haul trucking here as an example? I don't know that it impacts rail. I mean, rail, the interesting thing about rail is we deal with 2 Class 1 railroads. They have this thing called precision schedule railroading, which is a nice term, but what it really means is they want to focus their network on high density corridors. So they're not going to be, everybody looks at a rail map and says, oh, they can take all these containers to all these places. But from an intermodal perspective, there are really very few places you can serve via rail. So rail has its limits. We have to expand the number of places with inland ports that you can serve by rail. We have to find a way to make it more efficient. But I certainly don't believe the railroads are going to expand the number of, dramatically expand the number of places that are served by rail. So it's got its limits. I think we need to focus on how intermodal trucking coexists with intermodal rail. I certainly would like to see that the truckers could use the line haul rail more, say between Charleston and Greer, to move freight on their own bill of lading domestically and do the pickup and delivery on either end, right? And make use of that network. But so anyway, electrification is something we'll have to spend time on. I don't have a lot of answers on it right now.
Yeah, a lot of people get confused, particularly John Q. Public. They connect incorrectly electrification with autonomy, and they're different. So
my wife tells me that my wife wishes that the car was autonomous when I'm driving. She doesn't think I'm a very good driver. So
well,
I don't know why.
Mine looks at mine the same way, so that's okay. I got a 16-year-old daughter who's now all of a sudden criticizing me as if she's the expert driver now. So
well, that won't stop. That won't stop. I've got a 28 and 34-year-old. I can tell you that doesn't stop. So it only gets worse. So.
Well, that's the worst news we've heard so far, though, but that's okay. And I'll acknowledge you mentioned inland ports as if we were skeptical initially. And yeah, we were skeptical initially, but y'all were smart with what you've done. It's another tool in your toolbox. Effectively, it's even more quickly successful than you had projected. So congratulations on that. And we do know a lot of our members who are looking at that as an opportunity. So things change, and I think a rising tide lifts all boats. So anything you can do to grow that port and your volumes helps everybody.
I will say, Rick, that there is a lot of interest in some of the big companies around Greer in short-haul electric truck deliveries. That is for certain. There are a lot of big companies up in that area that would reward that type of behavior. So.
I had one question, and I'll save it for a second. Well, I'll ask you this one. One says, what about the decline in project cargo at Columbus Street, and are there plans to go this model?
It's a tough topic. I mean, as we have looked at Columbus Street, we have really focused it on roll-on, roll-off to support the growth of BMW and Volvo. We had to, if you remember when I came here, we had BMW stuffed in the Union Pier. It's kind of the one thing, I knew one thing that we were about to lose Maersk. I didn't know we were about to lose BMW if we didn't find a solution from Union Pier. So we had to move them to Columbus Street. We also were very focused. So we focused Columbus Street on what I call economic development accounts for the state of South Carolina. GE turbines, Siemens turbines, things of that nature. The nuclear plant, we handled parts there. Obviously, we all know how that ended, but So we don't have a lot of aspiration to grow project business right now. We're using the warehouses down there to support container operations. We're actually going to handle about 100,000 tons of craft liner board over there that gets stuffed into containers. And we're going to, service BMW and Volvo well and do whatever business we can for the turbines. It's not that we're not willing to handle project business. There's just not that much that's moving right now that's attractive to us. So I don't think that that's a growth segment for us, Rick.
Okay. You mentioned a minute ago the bill of lading and on the inland rail. I had a questioner say we're very interested in using the rail between Charleston and Greer on their own bill of lading, as you mentioned. But what has to be done for that to happen? The
railroad has to agree to it. Pretty simple. I mean, we need to work. I think we ought to engage with Brian Gwynn, specifically of the Norfolk Southern. And we pitched that idea. I mean, it's nothing novel. I mean, it happens in, hub transportation, and it happens in a lot of long-haul intermodal. J.B. Hunt does it all the time. Why it couldn't happen here is a question that I've always had. So it's something we need to put on our radar screen to work on, and most importantly, get them to quote competitively on it. And I think they've, railroads we all love railroads and we all hate them at the same time, right? So it's kind of hard to, and I'd say that if they were on here, I say it to them all the time. I don't really not say anything out of school. But we got to work on it. You should make that an agenda item, I think, that we discuss at our next Supply Chain Council meeting, right?
Yeah. We'll do that. Any others? Okay. But I'll mention one here as a close. So I want to just extend kudos to you and your team with how you work so closely with the Charleston Motor Carriers Association and their leaders. My understanding is y'all have regular communications and you do one-on-one with some of the key guys, troubleshoot problems for them. I appreciate myself the direct communications and the prompt responses I get from you and your team. And you're right, we do have to have continuous initiative ongoing with public relations, community involvement, safety, that kind of thing. Your long-term vision is paying off, so that's good news we've heard today. We have one more question before we turn loose. Currently, we can still move containers less expensively than utilizing the rail through either inland terminal. Why would we use rail? That's the question.
Well, I think it's a good question. Obviously, I think that trucking rates were projected to go up because of a shortage of drivers. That's not me saying that authoritatively. That's what everybody said. That seems to have moderated over the last year. For now, but I don't think any of you or I would argue that there's not going to be a shortage of drivers going forward. I hope we can counteract that a little bit together because it is look, serving this port on short haul truck drayage can be a good living. If our port works well, it can be a good living for people. So we got to work on that. So I think the trend my vision has been the trend over time is that trucking revenues are going to have to go up if it's going to be an attractive industry, and that rail can play a component in leveraging truck capacity, if you will. I think if you open an inland port in Greer, that leverages truck capacity. If you look at Eastman Chemical, just one example, they were trucking everything from Kingsport down to Charleston. That took 2 trucks. They had to stop in the middle along the way between Columbia and Charleston. They can now get 2 truck turns a day going from Kingsport to Greer. So that effectively leveraged the available truck capacity. So that's efficiency, right?
Yep.
So I don't, I think the problem in supply chain is everybody only focuses on the dollars, but I think people have to be a little more strategic sometime, and try some of these new concepts before you have an emergency and they're needed, right?
Fair enough. I think we've all got Zoomitis to a certain extent, but this platform has been, I think, efficient, certainly better than having to travel. So we appreciate you being willing to do this. I want to thank our team here, Taryn, our production manager, and Jill and Scott Woodbury keeping the show running on the other side of those doors. The last thing I'll say, and we've talked about this before, it was one of the questions I just got. It was about the Be Pro, Be Proud campaign, workforce promotion. So we just look forward to support from the Ports Authority and the maritime community down there as we try to increase the number of kids coming out of the school system interest in the skilled trades, diesel technicians, forklifts, construction, truck driving, and all that. That really just drives all these supply chain industries.
Well, last thing, you know this, Rick, Mary Thornley approached me late last year, Barbara and I, about, reopening her campus in Berkeley County and focusing that on truck driving and diesel mechanics. And certainly I know she's going to be looking for some funding in the legislature for that. I obviously have no idea what that's going to look like, post-pandemic. But we certainly need to stay on that case together.
Yeah.
Every discussion we have with a big retailer about putting infrastructure here also centers on the availability of truck drivers for private fleets and things like that, and third-party fleets. So we've got to be responsive to that. So we're aligned with you on that. And also, last thing I want to say, there a lot of people think if they complain about the port that we'll punish them or something. We're not punishing anybody. We rely on you guys. So if there's something that we can do better, tell us. We haven't cornered the market on all the good ideas in the world here yet. We're trying, but we're not there yet. Well, so help us be better,
Well, same to you, and it's a rough and tumble world, so sometimes we have our arguments, but I think we're all pulling in the same direction. And so we appreciate you, what you do, your leadership, your team, and thank you for being with us today, and Godspeed to you.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks to all your members, and best wishes. 2020's got to be better going forward, right? So
gotta be. One last thing. Thank you for our truck fund sponsors. I'll read them again. McGriff Insurance Services, Carolina International Trucks, the Bunch Group, Christopher Trucks, Excel Truck Group, the Pete Store, and Worldwide Equipment, the truck people. Take care.
Take care, Rick.
Yes, sir. Thank you.